let's talk about the fourth book in the Earthsea series, Tehanu. Tehanu, written by Ursula Le Guin around 1990. It was originally marketed as the last Earthsea book, which it wasn't. I'm interested in it partly for its qualities, also for just the way in which it happened. When the first Earthsea books, the first three that I've talked about already, A Wizard of Earthsea, The Tombs of Atuan, and The Farthest Shore, all came out in the early 70s, pretty close together in time. And all of them are some version of the young person growing into adulthood or maturity story. The main characters who the reader experiences the story through are young, and they give the feel of Earthsea of being a young person's world. A lot of fantasy literature is aimed at the young, and the world takes on the qualities of youthful characters. They pay attention to what youthful characters would pay attention to, and so on. Tehanu came out almost 20 years after The Farthest Shore, and it has grown with its readers. I think it's like if the people who enjoyed the the first three Earthsea books when they were roughly the same age as the main characters, in their late teens, 20 years had passed, and now they're older, and instead of writing a book that would simply repeat the sort of the youthful growing into maturity or growing into deeper knowledge of the world and the self story, it's like Ursula Le Guin wanted to follow her audience into middle age. And Tehanu is very much a middle-aged person's book, and that's just not common in the fantasy world. That's just not common in fantasy literature. If you think over the great fantasy stories, and in different media, there tends to be a youthfulness to them. They don't necessarily involve the transition from childhood to adulthood, but even then they tend to focus on the experience, the ideals, the feel of a young person's book. Even if the characters in them are not strictly young, they tend to act young. They tend to test their values against great odds and this sort of thing. And so when I read Tehanu the first time, I remember I was so surprised by this experience, by expecting it to be like the Earthsea books that I knew and the world as I thought I understood it, just sort of the tone of the world. It was just a shock. And then it was only, and that was what I primarily remember from reading it the first time through, was simply shock. I did finish it, but I didn't know what to think about it. I was a teenager, and it took rereading it as an adult to appreciate its quality, and I now think it's one of Ursula Le Guin's best books. Tehanu is the name of a character in the book, but the character we experience the story through is Tenar, who was the main character in The Tombs of Atuan, who left her home island and went out into Earthsea with Ged. In Tehanu, she is living on Gaunt, which is the island that Ged was born on and where he first learned about magic. And she's come there. She is married, and she's now a widow, and she works the farm with the man that she lived on with her former husband. She has adult children, a son in particular who is working as a sailor off the seas. There's nothing. She's living a very mundane life. She's no longer like this potential leader of a cult, dealing with things like the deep powers of the earth, or the lost ring of Ereth Akbe, those sort of like high romance elements of her life, they're just not in this book. She's a woman, his husband has died, and is working the farm that she owns. And Tehanu is a child who has been damaged and scarred by abuse, and has come to live with Tenar. And the tone of the book is so somber. It's so filled with just kind of straightforward sorrow and straightforward challenges of just kind of this. There's nothing extraordinary. There's no deeper promise of like great events like in Farther Shore or Wizard of Earthsea. There isn't this sense of world-shattering stakes. Things have gotten, and the story basically stays on Gaunt with Tenar at the farm, almost all of it. There's none of that motion through a fantastical universe, which gives a lot of pleasure to fantasy literature, is this, going to exotic places where people do things differently, and where, the writer can sort of people the world with wonders. You're just on this farm while Tenar struggles to, live, to do the work of the farm. There's no sense of freedom from labor, to do the work of memory, of grief for her former husband, to take care of this child who doesn't speak, who's something of a riddle to those around her. And in the middle of all this, Ged comes back at the end of the Farthest Shore. Ged was completely drained by his effort to save the world and to heal the crack in creation, and he is picked up by one of the dragons he's friendly with and flown off, and we don't know exactly where. I think they say it might be back to Gaunt. Anyway, he's dumped. I remember it as being very unceremonious. Like, this dragon just shows up on Tenar's farm, dumps Get off, and is like, "Bye, it's your problem now." And so she has to suddenly deal with this figure. She hadn't seen him for a long time. He's been Archmage. They were close at one point, but they're something of strangers to each other. And in the book, they act very strange to each other. They seem very strange. Ged doesn't want to speak about what happened, even once he recovers. His power to do magic is gone, and he becomes very grumpy. He's not likable. In Wizard of Earthsea, of course, he's the main character, and in Farthest Shore, in Tombs of Ashwan, he's become very likable, and in Farthest Shore, he's become this really sort of wise and trusted mentor figure. And now he's just a grouch, because he's scarred, he can't do magic, he doesn't know what his life is supposed to be about, and he's not very sympathetic at all. I don't know another fantasy series that takes the kind of risks in naturalistic development of its characters like happens at Tehanu, where these youthful characters are now facing a really tough, difficult passage of life in their middle age, and they're both assessing, like, what is life about now? Ged takes it much worse because he feels with the loss of his magic, and Tenar is not super. She can sort of sympathize with him, but not deeply, because there's a lot to do, and there's a lot of life to live. And at a certain point, she sort of wants him to, like, basically re-engage. It's like, yeah, you can't do magic anymore, and your craft is gone, but you know what? You're still here, and we still have life to live and things to do. And Ged is a mature person and does respond to this, but it takes a while. And Tenar is busy, and there are these, like, threats in the neighborhood that I do not recall clearly that sort of center around Tehanu maybe being a danger to the community. People do not react well to her silence and her scarredom. They don't see her as like a wounded child who needs care. They see her as like a sort of a stigma on their, and they're like a possible threat. There's like a well-off landowner who either wants Tenar to marry him. Some of this is not clear in my memory, because what I remember more is just the tone. The tone of the book is that much more difficult moment. Transition from youth to adulthood is difficult. No one says it isn't. But the endurance demanded of middle age, I now appreciate more when the ability to sort of learn and to respond easily, and just the sheer demands of work and the commitments made and the way things pile up and the people who can deal with things. Their reward is simply to be given more things to deal with. Tehanu is just full of this, and Tenar is a very cool, mature person to experience the story through. She has a lot of depth to her that she's learned just from living. She's really different than the Tenar of Tombs of Atuan. She's like a fully mature person in Tehanu, dealing with difficult decisions. And what also is appreciated is there is change in the story. Like, it isn't just pure endurance. There is this sense that the work that Tenar is doing to sort of keep Ged from sort of drifting off into confusion and just kind of early senility and woundedness, and to give some care to Tehanu, even if she doesn't know what it's for. That these do portend changes to the universe of Earthsea, but they just portend them. They just sort of, it's like there are these gestures in the direction that there are weightier matters going on here, and some powerful things that might occur, but they don't actually happen in the book itself as I remember them. They're just these sort of gestures at mystery and enigma, something still to grow. And it is got a great feel for that feeling when it's like there are these things that are changing around me, but I may not live to see them. I may just help them into being. I know not what sort of change. I will not see them, but I have to trust my values, my commitments, my instincts, in order to help something in a being that I myself may never see the light of day with. It's really cool now to me. It's a really tour de force. Sure, let's use that cliche. It's a real tour de force of using a pre-established fantasy world and then shifting the world in a completely, turning turning the whole thing on its plinth and showing a whole other side to it, even amid familiar characters and places, just showing a whole other side to the universe, and really expecting readers to follow, and to not just ask for kind of the same elements, the same tones in the books that they enjoyed more, but to say, there's more going on here, and there's more that happens, and these things matter too. It's not all young people going on adventures to find themselves or to heal the world or what have you. There are a lot of stories in Earthsea.